Production. In this lesson, we're going to talk about production, which is writing and speaking language. Production, speaking and writing, is the other side of communication. This is output. Anytime you're trying to produce a language, produce with language, make sentences, express your thoughts, whether on your own or in a class setting, it's a test. So absolutely one of my very favorite things about learning languages, the test is already built in. Do you understand it? Can you express it? It's really, really simple. Writing. While writing tends to be one of the last skills we develop in a language, if you're already literate, it's an amazing tool to skyrocket your fluency. This is one reason I believe that as far as deliberate learning goes, which is different from acquisition, and we'll talk about that in another lesson, writing is one of the best tools you can use to learn a language. It's great practice for when you're going to actually have conversations. Write very regularly. Write your own flashcards. Use themed vocabulary from a traditional textbook or a workbook to create journal entry. I really like to make task notebooks to do this. In a task notebook, you write what the task is, and then you write all the words and phrases needed. So, for example, going to a restaurant, writing out everything that you would need to complete that task, all on one page. Another task might be returning a defective item. You're going to write out all the words and phrases that you need, and you've got it all right there in front of you to practice. And you can use it to test yourself as well. You can use it to create dialogues between you and another person to practice what that conversation might look like. And you don't have the same pressure when you're having a conversation with someone when you're writing. You can stop, you can think, you can look things up. Think in terms of tasks. I'm going to leave you a very comprehensive book of tasks. There's about 400, but they're certainly not exhaustive. And they range from easy to very difficult. And this will give you practice in those journals. Start by including everything that's relevant to the task at that time. You might write about how to introduce yourself or talk about likes and dislikes. And then you can write out what you would say. Tasks provide a real context and include relevant structures, grammar, and vocabulary. So when you think in terms of tasks, you're not thinking about verb tenses, for example, or themed vocabulary. You're thinking about what you need to complete the task. So buying something at the market, for example, or telling a story about your childhood. Those are tasks. So thinking in terms of tasks is super relevant always, because it always sets you up to learn exactly what you need to be able to communicate. Focus on one or two tasks until you master them, then resolve to master one or two more. You're going to find that each one has vocabulary and language that serves in many other situations. For example, in a restaurant and a market, you may use the phrase, thank you. That's going to overlap, and it's going to complement each other. The Pomodoro Technique. So Pomodoro, of course, is a tomato in Italian. As you become even a little bit more advanced, and again, still in the novice level, when you're moving into intermediate, I like to set a timer, pick a topic, and write. And I start with really short periods, 5, 6, 7 minutes, and I don't allow myself any aids after I've completed some basic task journals. When the timer goes off, I go and start looking up words. I've also done this with Google Docs, where I've sat down and typed. And what I've liked about that, when I'm just starting out in a language, is that I can use the functions to look up words and phrases that I don't know while I'm writing. But again, I like to test myself when I'm moving out of that novice phase and into intermediate, when I can start creating with language. Speaking, of course, is another way to produce, and a very important one. Record yourself. Record yourself to develop your fluency. Set a timer and talk. Give yourself a test every day. Think about the topic that you're learning. And the only rules are to record yourself, speak in your target language, and do so for the time allotted on a regular basis. And keep track of the MP3s by putting a date on them. I don't always do this every day. I might do it once a week. I love hearing my progress. Practice conversations. One thing that's great about beginning textbooks, and you can order them easily on Amazon for a few dollars, as well as phrase books, and the ones that you create in your task notebooks, they've got lots of dialogues in them and lots of everyday language. Practice and memorize them repeatedly. Now, memorization isn't language acquisition. There's learning and there's acquisition, and we'll talk about that in depth repeatedly throughout the course. You'll hear those terms. Learning are those deliberate things that a person does to gain language skills. Acquisition are those natural words and chunks that you get from reading, from listening, from real communication. When you understand the power of using the two of those things together, your skills will skyrocket. I still like to include a regular practice of memorization when I am in the novice level of a language. Once you've either acquired and or memorized enough words and phrases repeatedly, you will start being able to express yourself in a language. And I'm going to point out the obvious here. Speaking tip, if you go abroad, which is altogether possible even for a couple of weeks, and get completely funded with airline rewards, your Airbnb, I'll point out the obvious here. I maximize the time spent on learning the language within that context. When you're abroad, you probably don't know anybody, and it can be intimidating to go and try to find locals to talk to, but I can't recommend doing it enough. If you're in a big city like Paris, there's going to be people who want to learn English. You can get into a language exchange and start meeting some interesting people and practicing. I highly recommend it. So you just want to make sure that you maximize that time speaking abroad. That was difficult for me the first time that I went, because a part of me is a bit of an introvert, and I felt like I was intruding on people. But it's really important to go out there and just take advantage of the opportunity. Go find opportunities. Go find language exchanges. Go walk into markets. Say hello to people on the streets. It'll really maximize your time. All right, again, if you want to dig a little bit deeper, you've got your documents as well as your task workbook. And we'll see you in the next lesson.